going to very quickly shut up, and I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca and Nell. As you will see, they kept me going, and you know me, lots of energy, really kept me energized throughout the whole lunch. So I know they've got a lot to say and a lot to share with you. A number of you sent questions already. No questions are off bounds, so you should please feel free to let the questions fly. I was doing it at lunch, they answered all of mine, so you should feel free to do the same thing. So please, I think the more pushing your questions are, the more poignant your questions are, I think the more learning we're going to do. And so they have both agreed to make this as interactive as possible, and to be open and willing to hear everything, any sort of question, energy, and any sort of question that you might have for them. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, we are thrilled to be here. Part of what we're going to talk about today is how Nell and I have different leadership styles. And I was like, I want to, he said, do you want to be at the podium? I was like, no, I like to walk. And Nell was like, I like to sit. So here we go. 2 different leadership styles in action. So I wanted to start by saying we are totally thrilled to be here. It is a humbling roster of speakers. And we were kind of blown away that we were even on the roster, to be honest. And it's also it's so exciting to be the first speakers in the first class, undergraduate class on social entrepreneurship at Harvard. When I started Project Health as an undergrad here in the late 90s, no one could have ever imagined a class like this. So this is just a really momentous occasion and super cool. What Nell and I wanted to talk about today is an issue that we're really passionate about, which is the leadership that's required to create social change. And many of the folks that will come and talk to you throughout this course and many of the folks you'll read about in the cases are powerful leaders, and I think often sort of embody what we think of when we think of leaders, which is sort of strong visionaries that bring incredible tenacity towards realizing a vision, in our case for social change. But in fact, true leadership to create social change is just so much more complicated than a single visionary. And we are here today to talk about leadership systems, and for folks that did the reading, they can see in the literature that there is an increasing recognition of how powerful and really critical it is that organizations understand leadership in a more robust way, that it's not about a single individual, but a group of people who come together with complementary passions and also complementary skills to really be able to create sustainable social change. And that's what we want to talk about today. So what Nell and I are going to do is actually take a few minutes at the beginning to share our own stories. Literally, how did we each come to Project Health? Because we think they kind of reflect the fact that we really do bring different passions to the work. And then spend a few minutes sharing with you a tool that actually will allow each of you to reflect a little bit on how do you understand what you bring, what is your leadership style and what do you bring to leadership? And do a brief exercise around that, do a quick frame up, and then really want to be able to take questions from all of you. And I'll reiterate what Professor Ager said, which is that I think it's incredibly unusual to have 2 members of sort of a leadership system there together at the front of the room at the same time. And we really want to ask you to ask us hard questions. We've spent a lot of time reflecting on how we work well together, given our sort of different, but we believe complementary visions. And we just really reiterate that no questions are off limits, and you should push us hard and ask tough questions. I also want to say that I know that there's some Project Health volunteers and alums in the room. Can you raise your hand if you're a Project Health volunteer and alum? Yay, fantastic. So you guys particularly have to ask tough questions. So my story begins in 1994 when I first came to Harvard and thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And through PBHA signed up with the legal committee, which placed me as an intern in the housing unit at Greater Boston Legal Services. And this proved to be just a transformative experience for me. I showed up, this was a spring semester of my freshman year. I signed up for some reason for this god-awful early Friday morning shift that I resented deeply every Thursday night. But showed up the first day and, honestly really just expected to, make photocopies, make coffee. I mean, I was 17, right? What was I going to bring to the work of defending the legal rights of low-income individuals that had housing issues? And I ended up working with an incredible attorney named Jeff Purcell, who is still a mentor to me today. And Jeff he was a Harvard-trained lawyer who chose to dedicate his life to working with low-income families. And Jeff would say, you know, every case, Rebecca, is the chance to push the envelope. And he would say, you know, there is no routine eviction case. There is no routine code violations case. Every case is a chance for us to do something important. And so from the very first day, he had me on the front lines with clients and doing intakes with families that would come in truly desperate circumstances. Folks that were about to be evicted, folks that just had horrendous housing conditions. And, you know, you would just have these incredible conversations where you would say to a client, you know, you're about to be evicted, you haven't paid your rent. Like, why haven't you paid your rent? And client would say, because I'm paying for my HIV medication. Or clients, you know, moms after moms that would come in and talk about how, you know, her daughter had asthma, and every morning she would wake up with cockroaches all over her body. Literally, one of Jeff's litigation strategies was to collect cockroaches and bring them to court in a glass bottle so that the judge could see. And I think what was so profound for me about this experience was just beginning to be steeped in this connection between poverty and poor health. Every case, although families would, of course, present with housing issues, every case at the end of the day was about health. And increasingly, I felt frustrated with what seemed to me a strategy that was totally at the back end. I mean, by the time a family comes to legal services, something has gone seriously awry. And it just seemed that there had to be a better preventative model out there. So at the end of my freshman year, my dad, since I was a kid, has had this habit of collecting articles for me to read, and he always puts FYI, RDO on them, and I always totally resented it because I would like come home for Thanksgiving break having, you know, just been reading all semester, and there'd be this like stack of articles for me to read, and literally I would never read them. I'd be so annoyed. But for some reason, when I came home that June from college, there was an article that he had saved for me from the Boston Globe magazine called Zuckerman Unbound, which is the article that changed my life. And this was an article actually from the prior year's Christmas, because my parents, you know, read papers very slowly. And it was an article about Dr. Barry Zuckerman, who was chair of pediatrics at what at the time was Boston City Hospital, now Boston Medical Center. And our volunteers here know the institution well. So Boston City Hospital in 1995 was a city hospital, right? Almost, and in fact, to this day, it's since privatized, but serves almost the same patient population, incredibly low income. The average family income for a patient at Boston Medical Center is about $17,000 a year. Almost all Medicaid patients, largest free care provider in the state, level 1 trauma center. Every time you read in the newspaper about a shooting in Boston, they go to the BMC ER. And Barry Zuckerman, so the first line of the article was, Dr. Barry Zuckerman's first hire as chair of pediatrics at Boston City Hospital was a lawyer, not to represent the hospital, but to represent patients. And I was like, this guy is brilliant. I love this. It's exactly what I was thinking of. And I was so excited. And it went on to talk about how Barry had this, in some ways, totally obvious, but totally radical vision that a pediatrics department should be a place where kids get healthy. And that would require not only, of course, the best doctors and the best nurses, but also lawyers and social workers and developmental psychologists. In short, he had assembled a dream team of professionals. And the idea was that he was going to bring every resource to bear in improving the health of his patients. And I just thought this was brilliant. So at the start of my sophomore year, this was in the pre-Google era, I called information and got Barry's phone number and called him. And it was one of those things where you make that call and you're just thinking, like, please let it go to voicemail. Please let it go to voicemail. I have no idea what I'm ever going to say. And in fact, it's actually like literally impossible to get Barry on the phone, except that day, his very perky assistant said, well, he's right here. Here's Dr. Zuckerman. And so I stumbled through this initial exchange with him where I congratulated him on his good work. I'm sure he was thinking, you're 18, why would I ever care? But told him that I thought he was missing part of the solution and said that I believed that there could be an important role for young people in the work that he was doing. And Barry, to his great credit, I have been really lucky to have a lot of people take big chances on me over the time. And Barry, to his credit, said, I think half believing and half doubting, if you're for real, come spend 6 months in the department talking to our families and our doctors, and then you and I will talk. And I did. So I spent the entire fall of my sophomore year taking the #1 bus down Mass Ave from Harvard Square down to Boston Medical Center, and just had the most amazing set of conversations. From the first time that I walked into the lobby of the hospital, I just knew that's where I was meant to be. I mean, it's a total scene. It's total chaos. There's tons of immigrant families that come through, dressed in traditional dress, and there's, folks that are sleeping off their methadone treatment. I mean, it's total chaos, and I just loved it. And I ended up having these incredible conversations with physicians that were really powerful and really poignant. And I had no idea what I was doing. I did not have any public health training. I still have no public health training. Had no idea how to do a needs assessment. I know you guys are going to be doing some of that in this class. I wish I had had that. But instead, what I just said to the doctors was, in a world of unlimited resources, what would you give your patients? And the funny thing is, no one ever asked that question at a city hospital. Why would you ever ask that question at an institution that never has enough resources? And at first, the doctors would totally look at me like I was naive, which I was, but then would just have these impassioned comments and almost like confessions, where they would say, Rebecca, every day I have kids that come into the clinic. Kid has an ear infection. I prescribe antibiotics. The real issue is there is no food at home. The real issue is that the family is living in a car. And they would say, as a clinician, I know that if I actually want to change the health of my patients, those are the issues I should be addressing. But then they would say one of two things. Some of them would say, but I don't even ask about these issues because I have no idea where to begin. They would say, I have patients piling up in the waiting room. I have 15 minutes, 18 minutes with each patient at most. Even if I had the time, I don't know how to find this family food stamps. I don't know where the nearest food pantry is, where there's a Spanish speaker on staff that's within walking distance of their home because they don't have a car. And so they would say, I just don't ask. And then other doctors would literally say, I take $20 out of my wallet and give it to my patients. And I remember thinking, I know nothing about healthcare, but this is not a system. This is total chaos. And well-intentioned doctors really committed to changing the health of their patients, really lacking the tools they needed to be able to do that. And our sort of core program, the Family Help Desk, was born of those conversations. And the idea is that we would leverage the time, the energy, the tenacity of college students to increase the capacity of clinics to be able to connect low-income patients to the resources they need to be healthy. And the model would be that when families came into the clinic, they could either self-refer to the desk, say, I need help with job training, or in the course of the doctor's visit, when the physician or nurse identified one of these unmet needs, literally we have prescription pads in the doctor's office where the doctor or nurse can prescribe food for a family, can prescribe job training, can prescribe fuel assistance. And the family will then take the prescription out to the desk, the same way they would a regular prescription for medication to the pharmacy. And our core of college volunteers will then sit there at the desk and do a more extensive intake with the family and ultimately connect them out to the set of resources that they need, both through that sort of initial encounter in the clinic and then, importantly, through ongoing follow-up. And the vision here is a two-pronged vision. Our belief is that we should have a healthcare system that addresses the determinants of health. And our belief is that part of the reason, or the two main reasons why the healthcare system doesn't do that is first, that there are a lack of models of effective, affordable, clinic-based infrastructure to connect families to the resources they need to be healthy. Literally, we just don't know how to make those connections for families out of the clinic. And second, there's insufficient leadership in the healthcare sector to make winning models like that pervasive. So our approach is a two-pronged approach, both through our family help desk to increase the capacity of clinics to address these needs, but also to create a transformative experience for our core of volunteers who we believe will then go on to provide leadership, broadly speaking, in the healthcare sector. So we started BMC in fall of, or I guess February of 1996. We had our first info session here on campus. I think had like 25 applications for 10 slots. And today we have 600 volunteers in 6 cities, 10 campuses, 17 different clinics, serving about 14,000 children and adults each year. And as you can tell, this is my passion. And it's been an incredible, incredible journey. And in many ways, I think the humbling part is we are so just at the beginning of it. We are just 6 weeks in to a strategic planning process that will map the next 5 years for the organization and really try to drill down on how we're going to create the systems change in healthcare that we envision. Turn it over to Nell.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I think my favorite line from Rebecca's talk just now was, so I walked into the emergency room and it was total chaos and I loved it.
Can you imagine what it's like to work with somebody who thinks that's really fun? How stressful that would be?
It's a nice segue to my role in the organization.
Which is to bring order to chaos. There you go. Intro.
So if what Rebecca is passionate about, as you can tell, is what we do as an organization, I think what I am passionate about is how we do what we do as an organization. How do we bring life to a pretty compelling vision, and how do we actually deliver on that vision? It's one thing to have an incredibly powerful idea. It's not a small thing to have an incredibly powerful idea. That's not my role. But it's another thing to actually think through the systems and the structures and the culture and the values that have to be in place to ensure that we deliver on that idea. And there's a lot of articles, HBS and elsewhere, that are written on organizational culture and behavior, and Professor Egger can tell us more about that. But I know of these articles, and I've read many of them. I will say that I am not passionate about these things because of anything I've ever read. I'm actually very passionate about these things because of my own experiences and my own story. And those experiences and that story is really rooted in a lot of work that I've done in my career on community building is probably a good sort of title for many of the roles that I've played in the past. And an organization is a community. It's a community of people with shared beliefs who have a shared vision for where we're going and need to find ways to work together effectively to deliver on that vision. And so I wanted to just share just a couple of experiences from my past that helped teach me more about what it takes to actually build a community to deliver on various difficult visions that I've had a chance to be a part of in my career. And the first sort of vignette comes from my own experience as an undergraduate volunteer, volunteering much like many of the Project Health volunteers and many of you have done in your time here at Harvard. And it was a while ago. It was during my time as an undergraduate at Ohio University, which is in Athens, Ohio, which is in the southeastern part of the state, which is essentially the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and one of the poorest, the surrounding area is one of the poorest parts of the country. And when I was an undergraduate, I had the opportunity to do some volunteering at the county home, teaching adults to read. And I'm from the suburbs of Chicago. I had never spent much time in Appalachia or much of any part of rural America. And I was, as much a fish out of water as you can imagine. And that experience was the first time in my life that I had a chance to really come to understand what it takes to bridge the gap between between people to achieve a vision. And in my case, it was bridging the gap between myself and my first ever student, a woman named Debbie, who had come to the county home to learn to read. And when I first met her, I was terrified, as you can imagine, because I was like, I don't even know if I know how to teach someone to read. I know how to read, but I don't really know if I know the pedagogy here. Never met an adult that doesn't know the alphabet. This is really terrifying to me. And as you can imagine, it was pretty terrifying to her. And through the work that I did with Debbie, I came to learn what needs to be in place to build the foundation that's essential to work together toward a vision. In this case, it was a ambitious vision on a smaller scale, which was for her to learn to read. And the kinds of things that it took to achieve that vision or to work toward that vision together included coming to mutual understanding and mutual respect for one another and our perspectives. It included open and honest and transparent communication, and a true willingness to learn from one another and be humble and vulnerable in our attempts to work together toward a shared goal. And so, this is, Rebecca and I talk a lot about this. These are the very foundational sort of principles of any organization that's going to have a chance, or any community that's going to have a chance to really achieve a pretty ambitious vision. And I think that it is something that I learned firsthand, again, not from an article or from a business school class or anywhere else, but from watching it actually work. Because when those things were in play, we actually started to get Debbie to a place where she was reading, which was pretty powerful. And that was, again, a long time ago, and I've had a chance to have other experiences in my career where I've been part of building community. Another example was when I was campus director, which is a position at a nonprofit here in Boston called Citizen Schools. Some of you probably know about Citizen Schools. And Citizen Schools was, at the time, I think it was 1991, going through a time of rapid change and growth in their own strat planning process, a pretty challenging time for any organization to go through. And I had the opportunity to work in Fields Corner in Dorchester. Some of you may know Fields Corner, and work with about 60 middle school students there and their families. Again, building a community so that we could achieve a shared vision. In this case, it was around learning and growth for middle school students in Dorchester. And again, those same principles that I learned firsthand in my work with Debbie were at play in order for us to, in some cases, come up against some pretty seemingly insurmountable odds. We had to deploy open and honest communication, mutual respect, mutual understanding, humility, vulnerability, and through many, many interesting stories and experiences I could share with you all, I came to learn that in fact paid off, and we did what was difficult to do in that school, and frankly was difficult to do in Citizen Schools, in any of the schools that the campus directors were working with throughout Boston. We built a community. We built a community that allowed us to achieve a pretty ambitious vision for the students and families at the school where we were working. So I think that what sort of wakes me up in the morning and sometimes keeps me up at night is thinking about how we take some of the very compelling vision that you heard a little bit about from Rebecca and lay the foundation that is required for us to build the kind of organization, community, that allows us to achieve that vision in Project Health. And how do we do that at a time of rapid growth and various changes that are going on for us in the organization? While I was at Citizen Schools, I had an interesting experience where I saw a pretty serious contrast between what we were able to do at my campus in Dorchester in building community and what my experience was of the larger organization and my citizenship in that community. I think that at the time, and now I have a deeper appreciation for how hard this is to do, but at the time I found that I wasn't always as convinced that some of the principles that we had in play at our campus were truly in play in the larger organization, that I wasn't always sure that I felt the mutual respect that I felt was necessary for the community to work, the open and honest and transparent communication. Again, not because the folks working in the larger organization didn't know this was important or didn't respect me, but because it's really hard to take the time and dedicate the energy when you're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour and changing the tire while the bus is still moving, to ensure that those things are in place. And so part of the exciting proposition for me in coming to Project Health at this time when I joined about now almost 2 years ago is the challenge for us to actually realize that vision in how we operate as an organization. Because I actually believe very strongly that if we don't realize that, we're not going to realize this vision over here. So that's a little bit about what I feel passionate about in the work that I do at Project Health.
So I think when we think about sort of leadership systems and the idea that was talked about in one of the readings about this idea of an incomplete leader, right? The idea that often our perception is that the best leaders are the ones who are good at everything. And of course, the incomplete leader, the article makes the case, which I am a believer in, that the incomplete leader is one who isn't actually good at everything, because that's pretty much impossible, but has a very clear understanding of what he or she is good at, and is really has a strong appetite to bring in other folks who complement those skills and to fill in some of the gaps. And as you can tell, Nell and I arrive at this work from pretty different places, substantially different places. And as you can imagine, and I hope we'll get the chance to talk about more in the Q&A section, often pull in different directions, right? I mean, I'm out chasing a different kind of healthcare system. I'm chasing dollars to make it work. I'm chasing talent to bring to bear. I want us to grow big. I want us to grow fast. I want us to change the system. And, Nell is coming at this from a place of organizational integrity, right? What are our values as an organization? How do we think about not just bringing new folks to the staff, but actually keeping them in the organization because they are fulfilled and challenged and developed in the right ways? Nell cares about something called systems and processes, which apparently are helpful if you want to create social change. I don't know. To me, they're kind of systems and processes. But the reality is that vision, without a set of systems and processes, is frankly just vision. It's nothing more than that. It is not social change. And so,
typical conversation between the two of you look like when one of you is pushing hard to be the chaos visionary, and the other one is trying to, no, I've got to pull you in, I've got to rein you in here, we need these systems. There seems to me there would be a tension between the two. And you seem very friendly here, but maybe this is just a good acting job.
We'll duke it out later.
Exactly.
They didn't throw food at one another.
We were very polite then as well. I think that, I would say that probably, and it's like tough sometimes, right? But again, we have real conviction around, I actually think that we will get to social change so much faster by virtue of the two of us sitting here than if I were sitting here alone. But I think a classic place where this tension shows up, and it shows up all over the place, but a classic place is around funding. Right? So I know you guys have spent already some time in the class, and we'll probably spend a lot more time in the class talking about how do you build a financially sustainable organization, right? Critical, mission critical. No dollars, no game. And so the question is, how do we make that happen? And my belief is that, funders, investors, whatever you want to call them, they want to fund something that is big and exciting. Nobody wants to fund something that's small and boring and already happening, right? And so, my game is, I go out to funders and I say, we're going to change the healthcare system. Do you want in, right? And say, classic pitch will be, there's 114,000 college students in Boston. We're working with about 120 of them right now. We should be engaging every one of them that wants to change healthcare. People like to give money to stuff like that, right? And frankly, we should be engaging all of them. But apparently that stresses Nell out when I say things like that.
Like when Rebecca says stuff, I am inspired, as we all are. And then my mind quickly goes to, okay, how many staff would that mean we need to hire? Okay, since I am currently the HR department and this department and that department, we are currently, our national office is 5 people. I remember one time my mother said to me, I got the annual campaign letter, and it was lovely, but it did come a little late. And when I got the United Way campaign letter, it came about a month earlier, honey. And I was like, Mom, can we, let me just, mental image of the headquarters of United Way here for a second, We're 5 people. So I think
in one office. Like one room, okay, literally.
We used to be in a smaller office. We're growing. Actually. It's pretty
impressive. We
impressive.
have one bigger office.
But I think that obviously setting and managing expectations and delivering on promises and being accountable to those we deliver, we make promises to, be it families, volunteers, staff, funders, is something we have to be very vigilant about and very responsible about, because that is our organizational integrity, right? That's our reputation. That's our name.
And frankly, our efficacy, right? So, part of what is so dangerous about blowing out the model is I actually believe that part of the reason why more young people don't go into the work of social change is that they have pretty crappy experiences doing it as undergrads, right? I mean, we've all, including me, volunteered for programs where you show up for a couple hours a week, maybe you're making a difference, maybe you're not. Nobody ever evaluated whether you were making a difference or not. You probably weren't that well trained, right? And frankly, sometimes you missed stuff because you had a test, and that was probably fine. And what's so dangerous about that is that, that may permanently cause a young person to decide that this work is not for them, right? Literally suck talent out of the system. And so, yes, of course, I want every college student in this city that is passionate about health and poverty to be doing Project Health or something else that is equally powerful. But if we go too fast and too quickly and don't have the structures and don't have the staff support and don't have the training, we risk serious social damage, right? Not just a failure to achieve our vision, but actually setting back the world. And so, that's the classic example that plays out, literally like 20 times a day, is the constant push and pull between these. And again, our belief is, and we'll talk more about this later, but our belief is that if we could actually hit that point where organizational vision and organizational integrity align, right? Where we push and pull and get them synced up, that is the holy grail of social change. It just breaks open because you have the most effective organization delivering on the most compelling vision. And so part of the reason why we're willing to sign up for this is because, and Nell and I have talked about this literally together at lunch when it's just the two of us, that if we believe that if the two of us can be in the right conversation about our roles and our worldview and go through the push and pull and struggle through this, that we will actually build this organization. I have an executive coach through one of our funders, and was talking with him the other day, and he knows that this is our aspiration and knows Nell and knows me, and he was like, Rebecca, if you pull this off, and this is at the Monitor Consulting Group. I mean, they work with tons of Fortune 500 companies, and he was like, I've never seen anyone pull this off. And he was like, if you think you can do it, that's great. But our belief is that we want to be social entrepreneurs, as Nell was saying at the beginning, not only as to sort of the change that will result, but how we achieve the change, right? That we want to be revolutionary as to both of those. And in fact, only by being revolutionary as to who we are as an organization can we be revolutionary as to the change we bring about in society. So what I wanted to do now was actually there's a sort of, what Nell and I spoke about is sort of our passions, which are different passions, unified but distinct. And we also have different ways we approach the work. And I wanted to share with you a framework and actually do a quick exercise together with respect to this framework. And it's called the Cantor Behavioral Profiles. And so I actually find it super helpful when you're talking. There's a total possibility you look at this and you're like, this is just messy. I don't want to get into this. But what's cool is that, like, this isn't the first time this has come up, right? Like, this is an endemic challenge in social change. And so there's some really cool frameworks that can help tease out, again, who are you as a leader? What do you bring to the game? And back to the incomplete leader, the more you know what you bring to the game, the better off you're going to be. You're going to be more likely to play to those strengths and more likely to bring in the help you need to fill in the deficits that you have, that I have, that Nell has. So what folks are going to distribute, the TFs will distribute, if you guys can do this now, that would be fantastic, something called the Cantor Behavioral Profiles, which we're totally ripping off in a mostly unauthorized way. And this is like a really sort of abbreviated version of this framework. But the idea is that we all have ways that we show up to the work, right? And there's ways of sort of understanding and distilling how we show up to the work. That, again, the better we understand, the more likely we are to be able to create leadership systems that allow us to have the right people in the room to create social change. So once everybody has one, which I hope will happen shortly, I want to just sort of talk through these together. And the real way that this is implemented is that you actually answer a series of questions that result in sort of a diagnosis. You can just look on with somebody else's if you don't have one. It's not critical that everyone have one. But instead, we're going to have each of you code yourself as we talk through this, okay? So the idea is that the first thing you'll see here, and I'll sort of talk folks through this, so if you can follow along, that would be great. The first is that we have what are called action propensities. And essentially, these are the sort of behavioral stances we assume when we're interacting with others. And there's 4 options here. And the deal is that everybody is some of all of these things, but that we each tend to be mostly one thing, okay? So let me talk through what these 4 are, and then we'll take a minute and you can grade yourself. Just check the one that's most you. You have to pick one, okay, because that's the hard part. And then we'll move on to the next section. So the sort of, and the way I think about this, what I love about this tool, because I think it's super, super cool, is that first of all, it describes who we are, but it also describes how like meetings unfold or how leadership systems work together. And so the idea is, what I often think about when I'm sort of evaluating myself on this one is like, when I show up to a meeting, which of these 4 roles am I playing? So the first is mover, right? Self-evident. The mover is the one who shows up with the idea, pushes the agenda, drives the meeting, okay? That's one option. The second is the follower. That's the person in the room who's like, that is a great idea. I am really excited for us to put that into action. The third is, and this is actually my personal favorite. I am not an opposer, but it's my personal favorite. So the opposer is the person in the room who's like, yeah, that's never going to work. No, actually never going to work. And the thing is, that person often gets branded as like the pain in the ass naysayer, right? And what's amazing is this is a critical role on a team. So when
my department is going to get that.
We're collecting yours at the end. Oh no, not you. Nobody thinks they're an opposer. So what's interesting is when Monitor talks about opposer, they say Enron is because there were not enough opposers in the room, right? Somebody had to say, whoa. This whole scamming people thing, not a good idea, okay? Seriously, critical role, mission critical. Project Health, when our staff team did this, we had collected a lot of opposers because I know that I'll be better at implementing my vision if people are telling me what's wrong with it. And they do, often. And then the final role, also one of these underappreciated roles, totally critical, is bystander. So I actually myself play, I'm mostly mover, not surprisingly, but I'm actually second bystander, which seems so weird, right? Like, how is Rebecca bystander? So bystander is the person who listens to the conversation and then distills from it the common conclusions, right? So when the mover and the opposer are in gridlock, the bystander says, here's what I'm hearing from you, here's what I'm hearing from you, I think the path out is this, right? It's a synthesizer. So let's take 1 minute now, and if you can each just quickly check the one that you think is most you. Okay, is everyone done? Okay, so the next one is operating system propensities. This is like classic consultant jargon right here. Operating system propensities. Basically, this determines the rules that govern the language we use and the actions we take when interacting with others. Okay, that makes absolutely no sense. So what this really means is that that we tend to each show up in one of three ways. And the way I actually think about grading yourself on this is like if I were to choose an organization to work for, would I prefer a closed organization, an open organization, or a random organization? So a closed organization is a hierarchical, traditional, sort of value stability kind of organization, i.e. like the military is a classic example of this one, right? But you can also imagine that like, I don't know anything about GE, but like GE could be a closed organization, right? One that's like a more traditional company that builds towards the top. An open propensity is one that Nell says that she thinks she was random. Did you ever find yours?
This is the one I don't know.
I
think I'm actually open.
She's open.
I think I'm open. I think
she is open.
Yeah.
Okay. Loves process, loves deliberation, right? Loves sort of, consensus building, right? The idea is like we'll move forward when we together agree this is the right result. The third is random. Not surprisingly, this is me. I love this description. Requires fluid processes that emphasize individual creativity, often viewed as chaotic or out of control. Awesome. Values autonomy, innovation, and spontaneity. So again, as you sort of code yourself, like take like whatever, 30 seconds now to just code yourself as to one of these. And if it's easiest, you can think about like what makes me feel most comfortable? What kind of environment makes me feel most comfortable? Folks all set? So then the final one is communication domain propensities. I think this one, they're all interesting, but I think this one is really interesting. So this really drives to the language we use when we're interacting with other people. And there's three options here. Affect, right, which is essentially emotion and interpersonal connection. So, again, when you think about, when Monitor talks about this, they'll talk about like if you were engaged, let's say, in an argument with somebody, would your tool in that argument to build a relationship with them, to sort of say like, I totally understand how frustrating this is for you, like I'm sure this is really upsetting, like was that sort of your go-to? And again, we are all of these things, but when your first impulse, that would be affect. Meaning is emphasizes thinking and the search for truth. Focuses on ideas, access to information, coherent integration of thought. So again, you would show up to the argument saying like, here's the thing, the data just doesn't support your case, right? Like if you look at the data, that's not what the data says, right? Your argument goes to a place of knowledge. And then the third communication domain is power. Emphasizes achievement, efficacy, a sense of competency, focuses on getting things done, promoting accountability, achieving goals and results. So the argument there, your sort of first place would be, if we actually want to change healthcare, we have to do this. We don't have a choice, right? It's kind of muscling your way in to the result that you want. So again, take 30 seconds to code yourself here. Okay, so again, I think what's interesting about this tool, and again, this is totally the shortcut version of this. I'm sure the folks over there would be horrified at this version of it, but this is to sort of just begin to get you thinking about the fact that we play differently. And what's interesting about this again is, so the question is like, well, what's the purpose of knowing this, right? And you can look it up online if you want sort of to get a sense of the fuller tool, but the purpose of knowing this is actually threefold, which is, I think, really interesting. So the first is to really understand yourself. And what's cool about this is there's they call it like your propensities in your resting state, right? So like when you're just kind of going about your day, like what do you tend to? And then we actually often have a different set of propensities in like an agitated or stressed state, right? So like when we're angry, we may have a different propensity than we do just sort of on a day-to-day basis. And what's interesting is part of what Monitor talks about is the goal here is to broaden your repertoire. The strongest leaders have the ability to play most powerfully across the entire spectrum as to each of these, right? They talk about, for example, like Bill Clinton is a classic example on the communication propensities where like he's great with affect, he like meets you in the diner, super smart, right? Like if you want to talk about like, you know, what does the data say, he'll have that conversation, also very powerful, right? And so the idea is that partly we want to each build our own individual repertoire. That's the first way that you can use this. The second is that their theory is that when folks who are working together, individuals working together, kind of get into a rut where they're not being effective together, often it's because their propensities are misaligned, right? So, you know, somebody's an opposer and somebody's a follower, you get gridlock. And so it's interesting, you know, and again, the idea is that as to another single individual, you may play a certain role. You may have a set of propensities that show up only with that other person. And part of changing the dynamic is actually to recognize those tendencies and change them. And then the third, and I think this is super cool, is the idea that you actually, of course, as we've been saying all along, want a diversified leadership system. So what Monitor will say is like, look at your senior staff team, and like you may actually choose to hire an opposer. Like you literally, when you're searching for your next hire, they choose to hire an opposer. You need someone who's going to push back to be effective, right? Or they may say, you know what, you need a bystander. You got way too many movers and way too many opposers. If you guys actually want to get stuff done as an organization, you need a senior level person who's going to listen really carefully and lead the group forward. So I think that this is just a really neat tool. And again, you know, Nell and I obviously, as you can imagine, code differently on this. We actually, interestingly, both show up as affect, and both show up as movers, but then on the operating system differ. So it's, again, really interesting to begin to map your leadership team and understand where do you each play. So what we wanted to do before we open it up for Q&A is, you know, again, just emphasize a little bit what we've already said before, but, you know, our belief, again, is that for real sustainable social change, you want a leadership team that explicitly brings both different passions, but also different skills, right? Different sort of ways of showing up to the work. And that the goal is, you know, our belief is that, as you can imagine, there's one version of this where this is just a nightmare, right? Like this is organizational gridlock. We are at each other's throats all the time. We are frustrated in the work. And again, if there's not, I think, a real, really deep mutual respect and a real commitment to understand the power of leadership systems and leverage them, that this could be really frustrating. On the flip side, and Nell and I were talking about this yesterday, I think it would really mischaracterize the point of this conversation to say that like the goal is to avoid disaster. Our belief is that if you can actually get this right, if you can build the right leadership system and not just have the vision and be the visionary leader, but actually have a leadership system that brings all kinds of skills and propensities to the work, you are so much more likely to be able to achieve your vision. And so it's not just, again, about avoiding organizational liabilities or ensuring sort of a peaceful status quo, but actually exploiting this tension, capitalizing on this tension as a vehicle to really be able to be that much more effective. Because again, if you as an organization can achieve that sort of holy grail place where organizational integrity and sort of bold vision intersect, you really begin to be in a place where you can get something done. I don't know if you would add anything to that.
I think that's great.
Okay, questions? Yes? Do I always talk more? Probably.
Yeah, Rebecca talks more.
Would you like us to elaborate on that? I talk more in meetings, I talk more one-on-one, I talk more, no.
Yeah, no, Rebecca talks a lot. I think she has an increasing self-awareness that that can be good, and that's a big part of her job, right? And she's very eloquent and effective in sort of using that. But I think you've shared with me that you have some increasing self-awareness that sometimes talking less and listening. I mean, she's an amazing listener. It's not that she's not an amazing listener, but the more she talks, the less she's able to sort of practice what I think is actually a pretty powerful side of Rebecca, which is being an amazing listener. And so I think you've shared that that's something you're
I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's interesting because I think that, I think that I'm good at the talking, but I think I'm actually also really good at the bystanding, which actually when you look at, so the way you get this when you finally get your report is it's like a bar graph, right, that leads to like 100%. And you could be like 35% mover and 25% whatever. And so mine is actually almost equal mover and bystander. And I think I add a lot of value as a bystander, particularly as we have a more robust team in the organization where we have a lot of folks like Nell that come with a lot of their own experience. I think a place where I can sometimes add value is actually in listening and kind of distilling and translating into how we might move forward as an organization.
But it's an interesting question because I think one of the things that is part of our job in this leadership system is to be sort of students of one another, to really to pay attention and learn, where is Rebecca just amazingly, where is she so strong, where can she be leveraged, where does she have work to do, and likewise she is a student of my own strengths and areas for growth. And I think we, again, back to trust, what I was talking about before, and sort of mutual respect, we have a very vigorous dialogue about this where we are able to share that kind of feedback with one another and hear that from one another, which is really powerful.
It's funny because I was actually in D.C. earlier in the week meeting with our D.C. executive director and, or actually maybe, okay, whatever. Anyway, so I was talking to her and I was like, well, Nell would tell me to say this, and then Alex, who's the third member of our executive team, would tell me to say this. And the staff person was like, is that really how it works? And I'm like, yeah, it actually is really how it works. Like, I have my own thoughts, and then I'm like, well, Nell would say, right? And it's going to be something that, like, usually pushes back in some way, and I think Alex would say. So it's literally like, I mean, to Nell's point, like, part of the benefit of being part of a system like this is you actually get to walk around with these other voices in your head, coaching you, not even when it's in real time, but, like, just when you're, outdoing your own role in the organization.
Yeah.
Oh my. Why don't we start over here? Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of organizations do you find would be good for funding, and what challenges do you have when you present them with a mission and project help?
Like, what are good funders, you mean? Well, so that's, we were actually talking about this a little bit at lunch today. I mean, the answer to that question the most powerful answer to that question is to say, who are the funders you want in order to achieve your vision for systems change? So there may be funders that are really interested in your mission, but actually don't allow you, if your aspiration is systems change, which not every organization's is, but ours is, like we want a different kind of healthcare system, you're going to want to pick funders that drive towards that result. So specifically in our case, while theoretically we could fund our entire budget, let's say from foundations, that actually doesn't change the healthcare system, right? That's just about a bunch of outside entities paying for us to do work in another system. So over the past couple of years, we've actually worked really hard and have a lot more work to do, but have worked really hard where about half of the clinics where we run our family health desks now actually pay for us to be there. Not our total operating budget. We still rely on philanthropy, obviously, substantially. But our belief is that part of the way we will get the healthcare system to change is if we actually get the healthcare system to pay for what we're doing. Because it's a more profound acknowledgement of the value that we're adding and the importance of our work in overall health outcomes. Yeah.
I want to know if you think your organization can survive without you, because we were talking a lot in class about the sustainability of an organization and how in social entrepreneurship that the leadership team is the one that's really driving the organization, and sometimes without those people, the organization is not able to sustain itself. So I wanted to know how you thought about that, or what you would do if your executive team wasn't there anymore, if your organization would still be able to be sustainable.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this is a great question. I mean, I used to, back in my days at citizen schools, I used to talk a lot about the win being the day that your program can go on without you being there, right? The day that it can operate smoothly and folks are equipped to run things without you actually physically being present or needing to call you every 5 minutes. And I think so that's a great sort of yardstick for whether we're building capacity in the organization over time. And I think this becomes relevant at different stages in the life of an organization. There's sort of succession planning for CEOs that is one level of conversation. We're not there right now. But I do think that in our phase, and Rebecca, you should share more about this, but I think in our phase, Rebecca, when I joined the organization 2 years ago, it really was Rebecca was the only person in the national office. So many of the functions that happened, both from a national lens, but also in terms of the support for the sites, was going through Rebecca, which is not a sustainable situation. And so we've been in this really interesting time where we've been doing a lot of introspection, and Rebecca's been doing her own personal introspection around how do we shift that over time so that we build a team that can deliver on the mission without sort of 4 phone calls to Rebecca every 5 minutes. And I think that is a challenge, has been a challenge, will continue to be a challenge for us in the years to come, but it is absolutely essential that we move past that as a moment in time. And it's a healthy moment. It's a natural moment for any organization that starts with one person. But I don't know if you would say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I have this sort of interesting and I think a little bit unique perspective on this because I left Project Health. So, my story is I started as an undergrad, graduated in 97, ran it for 3 years. So applied to law school my senior year, like 6 months after I started Project Health, applied to law school, got in with the intention of deferring a year, which I did. And then I deferred a second year, and then I deferred a third year. My LSAT scores expired. I decided to go to law school. It was a mistake. I'm happy to talk about that. But a very expensive mistake that I will pay for the rest of my life, probably literally pay for. But it was interesting. So I actually, I wanted to leave. I didn't want to be I mean, there's literally something called founder syndrome, which is the founder won't go away. And I just didn't want an organization. I didn't want to be that. That's awful, right? I don't want a syndrome named after me. So I left, right? And I was very confident and really proud of that. And went to law school and left. So I left the organization for 5 years, from 2000 to, actually maybe it was longer than that, 2000 to 2006, I was gone. Now, I helped found the board of directors during that time, and I sat on the board. I continued to have a role, but not involved in day-to-day operations. But I came back, too, right? So 3 years ago, I came back. And to be honest, that was partly about my having, a huge amount of clarity about why this is what I really wanted to do. But also because the organization was really facing some major challenges in my absence. And I think that, and again, I think it's developmental, right? My goal is not now to embed myself in the organization in a way where it will always require me to provide that vision. But I think developmentally, frankly, it was too early to leave. And there's a lot, I talked to a lot of graduating seniors who want to start something because they get sent to me. And then they're like, I'm going to do this for 2 years and go to grad school. And it's that's totally important. But the likelihood of your building an engine for sustainable social change in 2 years is probably pretty slim, honestly, totally honestly. It takes more than 2 years. It's hard. It is complicated. And can you start something in 2 years? Absolutely. You can start something in 2 weeks if you want to. If you actually want to create social change, it takes longer than that. And to build an organization that can survive beyond your own contributions. I think what's interesting is, as Nell was saying, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I should be doing in the organization and what I shouldn't be doing. And, I think I've actually become more comfortable over time with the recognition that I am going to be the voice of the vision for the organization in this period of the organization. Not in perpetuity, but at this moment, that's an actual asset for the organization. So I think that there's a tension. I think on the one hand, you want to build an organization that absolutely can and will someday exist without you. And at the same time, you don't want that to drive to a point where you're failing to capitalize on the assets that the founder may bring to the work. And the more clarity there can be about, to Nell's point, where am I really adding value? And frankly, where could other people like Nell do a better job than I ever could? Yeah.
Great.
I actually love
Can we
that
start
question.
with me? Can we start with me? Rebecca will usually say something huge and be and Nell's going to figure out how we're going to make. She literally makes this hand gesture. She's and then there's going to be some systems and stuff that she'll have to figure out. I'm turning purple. White. Yeah, exactly.
I love the way you frame that question. And I actually might invite you to staff meetings just so you can ask that question. it's really interesting that you should ask this question about 5 years, because like I said, we're about 6 weeks into a 6-month strategic planning process. And Project Health, not to get too technical or too off track, is an organization that is going to attempt to use a sort of vehicle for organizational growth that's relatively new. So we're certainly not the first, but it's only been actually used by a handful of organizations, called a proof plan. It's really cool. So the idea is that, or I think it's really cool. So the idea is that the way many organizations scale is they sort of like have some ideas of ways that they might create change, and they play with those ideas for like 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years. And then at some point they say, you know what, we really have something here, we want to grow. And they blow out the model, right? So they're like, Citier did this, like 18 cities, 5 years, huge blowout. What folks have learned by observing this is that if there is not incredible precision regarding the development of the program model in phase 1, phase 2 is like propagating a bad idea or a severely imperfect and undeveloped idea. So the idea of a proof plan is actually to insert a middle stage, which in some ways can be sort of like, almost can be like we're slowing things down, which I guess we kind of are slowing things down. I hate to think of it that way. But I guess slowing things down, but saying, okay, the first phase of the organization, and this is like totally Project Health. So from 1996 to basically like 2008, we tried a lot of different stuff, right? We kind of like tested, and we didn't really have manuals or systems, and we were just kind of in there like trying a bunch of stuff. And at the end of this, we've concluded that the Family Help Desk is the model that we think will be the greatest engine, both around connecting families to resources and creating a transformative experience for young people such that they go on to change healthcare. So having named that, we could say the next step is to grow. And frankly, like we get probably 2 requests a week from like Houston and Atlanta and Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis, literally across the country to grow. And we could say, okay, we're ready to do it, right? Now we'll throw together some manuals and we'll do it. I actually really meant that when I said that. That's the funny part. But instead, enjoy would probably be a strong word.
Accurate.
Let's just say I'm an only child, and it's like the sister I never had, okay? We'll just leave it at that.
Which is also interesting, only child, middle child. It's just interesting to think about.
Do with it what you will. So the idea of a proof plan, and the first folks to actually create this innovation were College Summit, another social entrepreneurship organization that does college enrollment work. And the idea is to actually take a 3 to 5 year period in which you are doing incredibly disciplined development and testing of your program model, where you have like 4 critical metrics for success, and you will like use every organizational resource towards achieving success as to those limited and critical metrics, and literally at the end of that 5 years know whether you have a model that works. And the idea is that only at that point do you then begin to say, how will we grow this model? And maybe we'll scale it. Maybe we will literally replicate the model, Family Help Desk in every clinic across the country, right? Sometimes people want to hear me say that. But another potentially more powerful thing is we prove up that this works, and we go to Medicaid in 5 years and get Medicaid to pay for this so that clinics don't even need us, right? Like they have dollars coming in so that they can do it themselves potentially, and we're like training the trainers, right? Like we're training clinics how to run Family Help Desk. Everybody says, why college students? What about, retirees, the boomers? They're looking to volunteer. Maybe we diversify our workforce. But the idea is for the next 5 years, we were going to test in the tightest possible way one vision of our program model with a core set of metrics, and then at the end of that, be able to have a set of conclusions about what works and what doesn't, and grow what works. So my goal in 5 years, interestingly, you would expect it to be like Project Health is in 25 cities, or in 6 now. My goal actually in 5 years is to know that what we do works. And if we do, like literally, we will change healthcare. Not a question in my mind. Yeah?
Would you be able to sell that to payers, that sort of that research? I mean, go to insurance companies and show that. Would they reimburse you for that service?
Well, see, this is the cool part, right? Is that literally, this is the question we're working on right now, we're calling it the who pays question. So what we actually want to understand now is what would we need to show Medicaid or clinics or other third-party payers at the end of the 5 years in order to have a sustainable model. So our goal ultimately is that the financials of Project Health look like, yes, some national philanthropy, of course, that's always going to be critical, some local philanthropy, but that some to be determined through the strat planning process portion of our revenues derive from both either a clinical set of payers and then also, you'll love this, a set of university payers. Because it turns out that our theory, and based on some early data, is that universities will actually pay for us to run this program for their college students. And so we are trying to understand right now, who do we think we will need to, so the most powerful question in strategic planning, I think, is what do you need to prove to whom? Right? So we want to understand now, at the front end of that 5 years, what will we need to prove in 5 years and to whom? So yes, that's our theory, right, is that Medicaid should want to pay for this. It's preventative. Part of what we're doing right now is like doing this very intensive literature review, looking at how does access to resources like food, housing, childcare, job training, educational resources impact not only health outcomes, but also healthcare utilization, because part of our belief is that, as you can imagine, an economic case around healthcare utilization could be another driver to get folks to pay. Do you want me to wrap or?
No.
Okay.
Another couple questions.
So just on a different topic, but in work like this, you're inevitably going to run into like huge institutional obstacles. Like for example, if you prescribe someone job training, but then if they get a job, then they'll make less than they get from welfare, so they don't want to try to improve, and they're stuck into this cycle. How do you, like, what do you do both in the short term and the long term to move past a situation where it seems like you have to go one step backwards before you go forward?
So she looks at me for the hard questions here. Well, I mean, that's a tough question. That's a great question. I mean, I think that one of the things that we're doing right now is actually trying to define what the win is. What does success at the desk really look like? So we have a rough cut of metrics for us right now to use as sort of a guidepost for us in the work that we're doing now that allows us to measure success but even before we figured out sort of the strategic planning stuff that we're in the midst of right now. So for example, we are currently in a place where we're measuring success at the desk by whether or not families get connected to a resource within a certain period of time, which we need to work out, right? But like right now, rough cut, within 90 days of an intake at the desk, has that family been connected to at least one resource that meets the needs that they've professed that they have, or that
Meaning, have they actually gotten the resource, not just information about the resource, but they have like received the housing or received the food?
Right, so like defining getting the resource is something that we have to do by each resource, and it may look different depending on which resource is the right match for the particular need that's presented at the desk. So what's interesting about that is that we've used that as a proxy. So we've said, we know that the medical literature says access to food improves health outcomes, right? So the proxy for us, we're not actually at this point going to do a longitudinal study of health outcomes of the families that come to the desk. So we're saying as a proxy, if the literature shows that, are we able to say that at a minimum our intervention is connecting families to those resources? I think there's a lot of room for some digging around in that and pointing out all kinds of potential holes in that. And I think that's part of the work that we have ahead of us in this process, is to better understand how we measure success. It's a great question.
I think the other thing that I would say, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier today, is it's all about how you define the problem you're trying to solve. So we're actually not trying to solve the problem of people getting sufficiently high-paying jobs once they've completed a job training program. We're trying to change the healthcare system, right? Our goal is literally for healthcare to be practiced differently by virtue of the work that we're doing. So literally, the idea is that in the clinics where we work, prior to our showing up, whether or not families' resource needs were addressed was essentially a random and haphazard thing that was dictated mostly by whether the doctor happened to have either the interest or the time to address the issue. The sort of, that's the before portrait of healthcare. The after portrait of healthcare is that, in clinics that serve substantial Medicaid populations, every time a child comes in for a visit, along with all of the clinical indicators, there will be both a screening and then a set of interventions addressing social determinants of health. So, and again, it's not to say that whether or not that individual family's health improves isn't important. Of course it is. That's the justification for the whole thing in the first place. But so much of how you understand the scope of what you're trying to accomplish needs to be dictated by the problem you're trying to solve, right? And in our case, we are trying to prove to the healthcare system that this is a valuable intervention and should be routinely and systematically delivered as a standard part of patient care. So I think that, Nell provides the kind of like on the ground nitty-gritty answer, which is critical. And the idea is like that data is to what end? And I'm saying we want that win with the family because we want to prove a case about the practice of healthcare.
Will you guys stick around a little bit afterward? I know some people have other classes. I just want to say thank you both very much for coming by subway here today and really being very candid and sharing with us your experiences. And I think we've really seen a number of different things. Some of the things we've touched on too. I mean, this last piece we were talking about, we need to create a compelling story for these third-party payers. We've been talking a lot about legitimacy and authorization, exactly what you were talking about here. And I love this, I'm going to use this phrase again and again, no money, no game. And I really believe you can't overemphasize enough just how important that is to this whole process. So again, thank you very much for your insights. I think we all feel smarter for your conversation. And those of you who want to stick around afterward and ask questions, please do.